This, drum roll please, is episode number 200. Today we're featuring artist Randall Sexton.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called PleinAir, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plain air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhoads.
Oh, thank you, Jim Kipping, and Merry Christmas. Thank you for all those announcements over the years. Today is a big day. Today is the 200th episode of the PleinAir Podcast. Hard to believe, 200. This podcast has some absolutely incredible stats. We're reaching well over 80 countries. We're hearing from people in countless places around the world. We've seen literally millions of downloads, and I just love that plein air painting is spreading around the world. This podcast is part of that spread. This is a good virus. Plein air is a good virus, right? Because we want it to spread. We want people around the world to pick it up. And I want to thank you for listening, for sharing, for talking it up to others, putting it on social media and so on. That's really, 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 really nice. Now, I should have some Christmas music because tomorrow is Christmas Eve. I want to just say to you guys, I want to say have a very, very Merry Christmas from the bottom of my heart. I mean, I really mean that. This has been a tough year. We're really glad 2020 is coming to an end. I'm just saying. I mean, you know, we're getting through it, and we are together as artists, and that's been kind of nice. But I want you to have a really terrific Christmas with family and loved ones because it's very important. Our loved ones are more important than ever, and we want to have that time with them and just remind them how important they are to us. Couple of housekeeping announcements, if you will. First off, the end of the month, December 31st, is your last chance for the month of December to enter the Plein Air Salon. And of course, it's not all plein air painting. There's studio paintings. There's all kinds of categories, 19 different categories. $30,000 in total prizes, $15,000 in cash if you are the grand prize winner, plus you get the cover of PleinAir Magazine. And there's lots of other prizes and publicity and other things that you can win. So make sure, this is a really good time. You know, if you've got some time between now and the end of the year, the 31st, you want to go ahead and go through your paintings and say, what were the best ones for the last 2 or 3 years, and enter those, because if you enter and win in any category, you're entered into the national competition, and you're going to be seen by art galleries who are judges. And this can be life-changing. We've had many people. I was talking to Shelby Keefe the other day on my 12 noon daily broadcast, and she was talking about how the Plein Air Salon really changed her life because it gave her national exposure and, of course, put her on the map. She was on the map regionally, but not nationally, and so this has been a great thing for her. She never anticipated that she would win. So make sure you enter. That's pleinairsalon.com before December 31st. Also coming up, January 27th through 31st is Watercolor Live. We have an international audience, many, many people from all around the world, everywhere from Asia, India, I'll tell you, it's Saudi Arabia, Egypt. We have people registered from all over attending Watercolor Live, and we have instructors from all over the world who are teaching. This is the first giant watercolor conference of its kind, virtual, where you're seeing some of the very, very best and biggest names. You know some of the names, probably all the names if you're into watercolor. Some of them are kind of bridge other areas. For instance, like Larry Moore is going to be teaching, and he bridges not just watercolor, but gouache and oil paint and other things. So check it out, watercolorlive.com. Also, coming up February 14th, we have the Valentine's Day, which is the early bird deadline to save $500 on the PleinAir convention. Now, you say to yourself, well, I don't know if I'm going to go or not. Well, none of us really do, right, because of the state of the world. But if you get your ticket and you save the money, you can always get a refund. You want to hold it, because if we cancel, of course, we have a 100% refund policy, or if you can't come because of COVID for the same thing. But we think the May conference is going to take place. It's looking like it probably will. And it's going to be a grand celebration, everybody getting together, because we've all been apart, and everybody's going to want to hug each other if we're allowed. But it's kind of like Thanksgiving for artists. It's a great place to get to know PleinAir painting. We got several stages, simultaneous action on several stages, teaching. Then we all go out and we paint together, and Colorado is going to be spectacular. I'm so looking forward to it. I'm quite frankly looking forward to anything. Hey, coming up in the current issue of PleinAir magazine, we've got an article on 5 ways to boost your sales with Instagram. That's pretty cool. Also, a reminder to sign up for our newsletter. PleinAir Today comes out weekly. Sherry Donhus does an amazing job on that, and Kelly Kane does an amazing job on PleinAir magazine and Watercolor Today. And coming up after the interview, I'm going to be answering some art marketing questions and some things about planning, because that's something that's important to us. So hang in there after the interview. Let's get right to the interview now with Randy Sexton, who was hand-selected because this is a special guest, and a special guest for episode number 200. Randy played a major role in helping me discover and learn about PleinAir painting, and look where it led me. Look where it led all of us together. So thanks. There's several key people that I like to acknowledge who had a role in that, and Randy Sexton was one of those. So let's get right to our interview. Randall Sexton, welcome to the PleinAir Podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Sounds so official, doesn't it?
Eric? It does.
So you and I have some history, and I talked a little bit about this when we were on the 12 noon Facebook show when you were on recently, but for the benefit of the people around the world that didn't hear that, I didn't know what PleinAir painting was, and my wife had kicked me out of the house because she was pregnant with triplets and didn't want the smell of solvent or oil paint in the house. And so I started going outdoors, and I didn't know what PleinAir was, but I saw something about a PleinAir festival in Martinez, California. And I think there was a poster, and you were the highlighted artist on the poster. It was a image of the base of the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge. You remember that?
Mm-hmm. I remember it well.
Yeah. So you were really kind of instrumental in my journey in getting here eventually. And we, of course, eventually met. I think I took a workshop from you pretty soon after that. And I learned all about everything I didn't know anything about. And some of those things I still can't do, but I learned them from you.
Well, I am hugely honored, Eric, and you shared that story with me, when we were speaking just a couple weeks ago. But as a matter of fact, that same workshop that you participated in, I have some photographs. I don't know if I don't think they're from the whole group, but they're some of the very first photographs that wound up in my photo library on my, digital photographs, because it was right at that time. I think I just caved and thought a computer might be a good idea, and so on. So they're the very first photos in my photo library that show up, and I am hugely honored that you that you brought that up and you remembered that, and I didn't realize that trip to the Scene on the Straight in Martinez impacted you as much as it had, but obviously it did, that you are, have taken PleinAir to where it is.
Well, I've been merely reflecting what's been going on, but thank you. You have had a huge impact on a lot of people's lives, and we're going to talk about that today. And So I kind of would love to roll back the film to the cradle, that very first moment when you had a toothbrush, a paintbrush in your mouth instead of a whatever it is they put in babies' mouths. When was your first recollection of being interested in this art thing?
Well, art in general, I have to confess, I was born. There's a little bit in my DNA. I was born into a family that my dad was a craftsperson in the 60s, 70s. A little bit of a jack of all trades kind of character, but he did a lot of different types of projects. He was always in his studio. So he was a big influence on me when I was growing up because of that. He had a silkscreen, handmade silkscreen, like greeting card line, but sort of briefly during the 60s until at least, I guess, the late 60s until the recession hit in the 70s. I think that was the key thing that kind of turned him away from that, and he started doing some other projects. Wood carving, and he worked with metal, did some collage. So he was always in his studio. He was a frustrated business person, but he worked all the time, and I think that work ethic and just being around that was very imprinted me very early on. And then a couple of teachers had a big impact too. An art teacher in high school was a huge influence on myself and a number of other of my fellow students.
Where did you go? Did you grow up in the San Francisco Bay Area?
No, actually, I grew back east in the center of Connecticut, right smack in the center. Basically, there's Middletown, which is right between Hartford and right in the middle of the state between Hartford and New Haven. Uh-huh. And I grew up across the river in a small rural town of East Hampton, uh-huh. Originally Belltown. In fact, my family went back a number of generations, and the Bell factory was where a bunch of them worked. Even have some of the old tuning bells from one of my great I think he was an uncle
how cool.
My grandfather, but he was a tuner. He made sure that the bells had like a model that they would tune them to.
You never think about tuning bells. Pardon? I mean,
I don't think they have to tune each one, but I mean they do have to there's some type of way to regulate how they.
So there was a moment in time when you said, "Hey, I'm going to San Francisco." Yes. How'd that happen?
Yeah, that was a bit of on a whim. Right after college, I wound up going to the University of Connecticut, with being encouraged by the same high school teacher to go to UConn because they had a pretty strong art department, especially sculpture. That was what I started off in, and then I wound up painting in that same school. And when I graduated on a whim, basically, moved out to San Francisco just to see what it was like on the other side of the coast. I had some friends that were also just kind of tentatively or temporarily moving out here, and then I thought I would be here for 3 months, and I've been here since that was 1980, so 40 years.
Yeah, wow. Well, that's a terrific story. And what an interesting time to be in San Francisco. I mean, you've seen so many different eras. I lived out there, as you know, for a while, and I got to experience being part of the .com era. But there's been so many different things that have happened since you've lived there, and it's always been a really impactful place. Was there something about the area that attracted you from a visual perspective for painting, or were you painting at that point, or were you still doing some other form of artwork?
Well, I experimented with some different art forms. I came out of the University of Connecticut with more of a abstract painting background, and painted like that here for 3 or 4 years until I met my ex-wife and actually had a couple of experiences that just inspired me to start on another avenue with my painting. And one of those experiences was going to a trip to the Four Corners and coming across the ancient bristlecone pine forest and seeing these trees that are 3,000, 4,000 years old, and standing in front of them and just feeling this incredible sense of time. And I was just so inspired. I thought, what I'd really like to do is learn how to paint more representationally, so I can kind of get into that, potentially get into interpreting the bristlecone pine trees, because they're so stunning, for one. And so when I got back to San Francisco after that trip, I enrolled in some drawing classes at the Academy of Art, and then some more classes in figure and portraiture to work on my drawing chops. And then everything just shifted from working more abstractly to working more representationally. And then once I started getting outside, I was really addicted or, attracted to the adventure of being outside and the freedom.
Would
you
say that when you graduated from art school at UConn, that you didn't really know how to draw?
Well, I did have a strong drawing. It wasn't that I didn't know how to draw, but in fact, my drawing skills were what steered me towards painting while I was at school, because we did have a pretty, art school in the 70s, this was, the late 70s, was a little more like an art appreciation crash course. I think for myself, is like exposing you to various different ways of thinking. And then in some ways it was just kind of do whatever you want and then talk about it. I mean, that would seem like, if I could sum it up really, in a very cryptic way, that's sort of what that experience was like. And it did open, I did a lot of drawing, but the drawing that I did was a little looser, and I just wanted to be able to work that into my paintings. I guess that was it. It wasn't the translation, the way that drawing, those drawing chops weren't really playing into my paintings. It was more learning how to paint representationally, but the drawing part, I think, is where I started off on that journey.
The reason I ask that is because I've heard so many art school horror stories of people who went to art school and they were told to express themselves and so on, but they weren't really oftentimes not taught any principles. Or I've heard from people who've told me they went to 4 years of school and never had a life drawing class. Things that I think a lot of us consider to be essential just were not happening throughout the 60s and 70s, because of, and part of that was because representational art was just kind of not considered to be anything anybody would ever want to do again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was the time that even Sargent's paintings were in the bathroom at or what have, they were just sort of hidden in the Boston museums. And exactly. I was exposed in that, during my education to a lot of different types of work, and some that really stand out at the moment. That was when I first learned about Diebenkorn, for instance, and I was really intrigued and interested in his work, as well as Fairfield Porter. So there was inspiration. It was just hard to put all that stuff together, in that particular experience for myself. And I can't speak for everyone, in the time period or what have you, even in that school. There were good teachers, but it was kind of piecemeal, and abstract painting is a tough one, in that there were a lot of teachers at that same school that were tenured and a lot of them were from Yale, and they worked abstractly, and that I kind of was, told. I just painted like that. I enjoyed painting like that. I still do, actually.
Yeah, you mentioned when you were on the broadcast, the noon broadcast, that you had kind of started returning to some abstract work.
Right. I had that abstract piece that a recent piece right behind Thomas when we were painting that portrait. Yes. And one thing I do feel like it still informs my painting style, or the way that I approach painting, is that I'm not a good planner. Let's start that over. Well, that is somewhat true, but I really appreciate the adventure and the discovery in the process of painting. That I don't know always where I'm headed in the painting is a good thing. If I know, if I try to plan things too much, that experience usually goes south for me. For instance, I have one. I don't know if I have shared this story with you before, but frequently I'll do demonstrations for art associations, and one of them you probably even remember being, at least aware of, over either in Pleasant Hill or Alamo, and this type of situation, you go to a meeting that they're having, and they usually do like a half hour or 20 minutes of some, announcements and so on. And then you're on stage to paint for an hour. And it's difficult to finish up painting. I mean, I can paint fairly quickly, but it is difficult to finish up something. So one gig like this, I put together, I had a reference that I had painted out in Telluride. I had a little sketch that I had painted out in Telluride. I had the photo with me that I blew up, and I had pre-mixed all the paint that I was going to use. So it was ready to go, right out of the box. And it just crashed. It was the worst thing that I think that I ever got into in terms of a demonstration, because it was so sort of like it was almost like I had a recipe in front of me, and here's this, and it just went south really quick. So I do still feel like that experience of being in college and the experience of playing with paint and the adventure of the whole experience being the process.
Well, when you did that video with us, which was painting an old turquoise MG out in the field somewhere, you were talking about abstract shapes and painting shapes instead of painting things.
Yeah, I think that a lot of I think identifying that things have shapes. You can call it abstract, but they do have that shape. That trying to see things as shapes and not things is, I think, what informs a lot of my painting, and that's what I try to encourage people to understand and see in their own journey.
I think that there is, we all go through our, as you say, our journey, and we sometimes we can't appreciate something that's being taught to us until we've accomplished a certain level of understanding, I suppose. And I remember you discussing that in a workshop that I took with you I think we were in Oakland, and maybe Bolinas. And those things, even though intellectually they resonated, it was hard for me to be willing to let go of where I was at the moment to go for those big shapes. And then later in my path, it's like all of a sudden it hits you, and it's like, well, duh, you have to do that. I mean, there's not a must have to do, but what is the best way for someone to kind of get rid of that letting go? I mean, when we first start, when many people first start painting, they operate under the idea of they want to duplicate a photograph, and meaning they want things to be photorealistic. And then, they kind of get that down, and then they kind of start loosening them up and letting it go and so on. Now, some people start out right away being looser, but I think that at least in my particular case, I was trying to be highly, highly detailed representational. And it was not until I really understood that idea of big shapes, because I was putting the decorations on before the cake was made.
Mm.
Right?
I like the analogy to that when you're painting, it's more similar to sculpting, that when a sculptor, works with a portrait. So a portrait is a good example of this because it's a little easier to visualize. Everybody knows what a head looks like. That when a sculptor sculpts, they're taking that big ball of clay and they're roughing in the overall shape of the head first. They're not starting off with an eyelash or an eyebrow. They're trying to get the bigger forms and then carve into. And as a painter, I make the analogy to the sculpture as carving. You're carving each time you're putting the brush to canvas. You're establishing an edge somehow, or an area. And the play between positive and negative shapes, or arriving at that edge, is much like the way that a sculptor, manipulates that clay, pushes it around to try to arrive at the right edge or the right form. So it's to me that, that analogy that I think resonates for a lot of people. I'm not really sure how else to describe or to express that. I think that's a good way to talk about it.
So how do you learn to see shapes?
How do you learn to see shapes?
Is it just a matter of squinting and just telling yourself you're looking for big shapes first?
Yeah, I think so. Another thing that I think helps people to understand this too is like that when you're, for PleinAir especially, working outdoors, the big challenge is simplifying the complex. Like nature is just so varied. Thankfully so. It would if we were on Mars, things would be different. But there's just so much, and when you're outdoors, it's a lot to process. But like you say, you're squinting down to see. I tell folks that I have to see a lot of contrast in whatever that subject matter is. I have to see a fair amount of contrast first. So I gravitate towards things that do have that. That's why part of the reason I like to paint vehicles or figures, and there are painters that can paint green on green on green. Morgan Samuel Price, for example, amazing. I have one of her paintings in my house, and I just look at that all the time and think, oh my God, how did she do that? Because that is the nuance, the subtlety between the greens that she's able to manage are just exquisite and beyond my skill set. I like to play with big shapes and I kind of move the paint around. That's what I enjoy, is kind of getting into the visceral juiciness of paint. I wish I did it even more so, was able to get it thicker and so on. But I think another little analogy helps, and that is that in plein air painting, it's kind of as if you're learning a whole language in another language. That's sort of like you're creating in order to suggest more with less, that you're suggesting things out there with shape and color, and that the language is a little bit like shorthand. Like you're learning a language, it's like learning shorthand, and you can't learn that whole language all at once, no matter how smart you are, or how good at you are at shorthand. But you take baby steps, so you learn how to. I think that a good, I'm working with in a mentorship program at the moment, and one of the exercises that I put out is the very first exercise is just to take various tree shapes and try to design them different ways, not just copy, but see what you can do to generalize the shape first, suggest the shape, but play with that whole notion of the positive and negative shapes, to just work with that with design. And as an example of just that, not trying to get all the grass in the foreground and like a 180 degree panoramic, manage everything. It's just a sky against a tree against the sky, and we get that going, and then we'll move on from there. So I think that's a good. That's another good way to think about it, is that you're building a shorthand, you're building a language, and not to expect that you can do it all at once, but to go gradually.
How would you say that your plein air painting has changed from the time you've been teaching plein air painting for how many years? 20 years?
Oh, at least. I mean,
yeah.
I think that when you took that class, it was probably about 20 years.
Yeah, well, my kids were not born yet, so my kids are 18. So let's use 20 years as the marker. What changed in your work and the way you approach painting now versus 20 years ago?
Interesting. That's a really good question, and I think that there's certain shifts, and I don't even recognize them when they happen so much. I know that I'm always striving to sort of get beyond myself and move somewhere else, and that lately I've been moving in even a more abstract or a looser direction that has more to do with depth, more to do with atmosphere. I think when you first started painting with me, and I had been painting before that, I had been painting for another decade before that outside. I think I was drawn to, much like what you were describing, to not necessarily photorealist work, but continually trying to get more information in, and my paintings just got more complicated for a while. And now I've cut back on that goal, and my paintings are a little bit more about mood and atmosphere and depth, and that's the easiest way I can describe it. And it's not all plein air work either. Some of it, more of it is studio work. In this context, series of barbershop paintings that I did. Those interiors were super, super busy. Just tons of stuff. If I put all that stuff in there, it would make me nuts first, but it's not the way that I wanted to try to portray these interiors. So I started editing a lot more and playing with just what was in front of me in terms of the painting and not referring to the reference as much. So that would probably be the best way to describe it.
It seems to me, and maybe this is just an incorrect observation, but it seems to me that as artists mature, after you've been painting, and I can't say that it's happening in my particular case, it's happening a little bit, but as we mature, the more time behind the easel that we spend, I'm seeing artists tend to go more abstract, much looser, leaving a lot of information out, and even maybe muting color a little bit more. I think, the seduction of color when we're young, and it's not about young, but young as artists, oftentimes it's that color that seduces us. And if I look at a lot of people's early paintings versus their paintings now, the early ones are saturated and the more recent ones tend to be kind of more muted, more grayed down. There's still the sense of color because they know how to manipulate color from a standpoint of warms and cools and how to bring color to certain highlighted areas. But so they still feel colorful, but they're not as colorful. Do you find that to be happening in your particular case?
Good question. I hadn't even considered that. I know that I don't, like I say, I like to use a lot of contrast in my work, so the color does play into that. I was going to say maybe it's just because people's eyesight kind of gets a little softer as they get
that
older.
was true with Monet. I mean, Monet's cataracts were so bad that, everything became very fuzzy. But, that actually might have something to do with it.
Well, maybe. But I know that myself. I wear glasses when I paint. I never did before. And for a long time, I think that when I wasn't wearing those glasses, and probably could have, that things were getting looser until I started wearing the glasses and seeing really seeing my canvas that much more clearly in front of me.
Well, I've heard stories about artists who have cataracts. Of course, back in the day when Monet had them, I mean, it was a big deal to get rid of cataracts, if you could at all. But, cataracts tend to color our vision. And I've heard stories from artists, many we both know, who have said, I had the cataract surgery and all of a sudden I realized how far off my color was, or how warm things were leading, because that's what they were seeing.
Yeah, you do. That one phrase, or that people do see things differently, is you don't take things you don't think of it as being that phrase being literal, but there is some fact to that. People do see colors differently. Women see more color than men on average. Men, it's all about what the cones or the rods, how many cones or rods you have in your eyeballs.
Right.
And And I think that, I could be wrong on this. Butterflies have lots of them, like 24. I think women have 4 to 5, men less. So,
well, I don't know that. It may be true. I know that there is scientific evidence that says that women have more neuroconnectors, which explains what they used to call a woman's intuition. It's just that, they're able to think things through more clearly, more rapidly, because they have better connections in their brains typically. That's scientific. It's not a sexist statement. So there may be something to that idea of better cones or more cones, or maybe it relates to that ability to have better perception of color because of the neuroconnectors.
Well, I'm just in this context that people do really see things differently.
Yeah.
My palette has stayed relatively the same. It's only recently that I have used the same palette of the same colors. Basically, I've shifted a couple of colors out. Like for instance, until I read Alla Prima, I had never heard of transparent red oxide before. And once I got that, it was like, oh my God, this is magic. I love that color. So I've got that on my palette, and I switched quinacridone for alizarin crimson. I mean, I swapped out from alizarin crimson to quinacridone red because it has more punch. And but all the other colors I've pretty much the same that I've been using for 20, 25 years, and the same amount, except for black. I added after Andrew Zorn, that traveling museum show of Andrew Zorn's. And
you added black to your palette?
I added black, ivory black, realizing, well, I tried the limited palette of his base. I don't know if it was exactly the same colors that he used, but the 4 colors, black, red, yellow, and white. And then when I started doing that, I realized that black is actually kind of a fun mixing color for greens and for some other things. Not if you lean on it too much, you really kind of, everything gets really heavy. If you just use it as your dark influence on the rest of your palette. But
yeah.
I liked the greens that I was coming up with, so I kept it.
Well, greens are a whole nother issue. I think, this is something that, again, a lot of beginners really struggle with, out of the tube greens and I'm staring out at my yard right now, and the greens are absolutely vibrant, but I'm not so sure if I painted them that vibrant they would look right. And
right.
And so, what are your best thoughts about mixing greens? What do you typically put into your greens? Do you ever use tube greens, or do you mix them all? Do you put other colors into them? Do you gray them down? What's your process?
I try to mix them more, but when I am looking, I use Holbein Viridian Hue, so it's a little bit of phthalo. It's pretty punchy, like the quinacridone. Those kind of the 2 jazzy players on my palette. So that is so electric that I have to stay away from that unless I'm using it as like a real rogue accent color. What I do try to encourage people to do, or I think it helps to manage greens, is to, whatever the scene is that they're painting, that if they can identify the greenest green, the most saturated green in the scene, because there's probably going to be just one. A lawn, for instance, is going to be a lot more saturated out of the tube type of green,
right,
than others. So if they can identify the most saturated green in the scene, then see how different other shapes are in the composition, and key into that difference while they're mixing. And I do mix, I use the ultramarine blue and the yellow ochre for darker greens. The black in ivory black and cad yellow will give you a very organic type of a green that can either be used as a dark or you can use the black to kind of cut down the saturation on the cad yellow. So it's a little bit of both ways on that. I will lean on I try to encourage people not just to use the green out of the tube. And that is a big issue. The big issue is that people thinking that something has to be green because it is a tree. They think that green's got to be there because something should be green, and that's when you kind of get a little more heavy-handed with that, especially tube colors. It gets out of control.
Well, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about of things that beginners tend to do. We tend to want to make trees look like trees, which is oftentimes a lollipop or a cone. And
or broccoli. I think broccoli.
And we tell ourselves that, that pine tree is green when in fact that pine tree might be blue or gray or brown.
Right. Yeah. Comparing and keying into the other colors, and that whole notion, that was one of the things from college, that learning color theory and more in terms of paint, that just threw me off from the beginning, is that that a sort of a rule that you might hear, that warm colors come forward and cool colors recede. Well, that sounds good, but especially in terms of abstract paintings, that just confused the heck out of me. What? Like, okay, well, I can only use that when I want a shape to come forward. What does that mean exactly? So there are some things that we hear about color that if you take them so literally, they can kind of like stymie and not allow you to for me, I think it's a lot of it is just color matching what you see. Trying to color match at least the same relationships. That's where I was getting with this, is like, when you hear that color is all about it's all about relationships.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's true. But it's easy to say that. It's hard to really wrap your head around what that really means in terms of how practically that is useful. But in pre-mixing, I think is a good way to go. I mentioned that demo that I did that went south, and that I do pre-mix my colors, not always when I'm PleinAir painting, and not always when I'm working with a figure, say, but from life. But when I'm working on a larger studio piece, I always pre-mix. So you are looking down at your palette, and you can actually see how things, how they're prioritized in terms of both value and color. In fact, I can't remember if it's one of the portrait painters, and I can't remember which one. I saw a great, portrait demo. I can't remember who it was right at this moment, but I remember him saying that there should be we should be able to say color value. We should be able to identify, that they're both involved. When you're mixing up something, you're defining both color and value. So it'd be good if we could think of them together instead of just two separate things, which I thought was, and I haven't expressed that the same way that he did. It was much more eloquent in the video, but it is, you do have to, when you pre-mix, that's what you're identifying is what's your darkest dark, what's your lightest light, everything has got to go in between there. What's your most saturated color? And then, or colors, there may be more more saturated areas than just one color that's saturated. But so if you can identify those, then you can kind of fit everything else in between. And I will exaggerate that when I'm color mixing. I say, okay, well, And at first, it's a little bit more average. I try to block things in softer shapes or softer edges, and I try to get close to what I see as sort of the average color. But I'll strive to kind of push or exaggerate, as if you're in iPhoto or in your photo library and adjusting your photographs and just ramp up the saturation a little bit. That's what I do with my paintings, kind of, bulk up on the color. I think I still do that. I don't know whether I'm changing up my color mixing, although I have been thinking about using, playing with just a few colors, like, purple and yellow, just doing some limited palette paintings with that are different approach, just to see what happens.
Yeah, well, that's always fun. And one thing I love about being around you is that you have a little bit of an experimental mentality, which I think is playful, I guess is the word, or curious. And you're always trying new things and experimenting. And I think that's probably what's really led you to being such a strong artist, is that you're willing to not stick to what you learned 30 years ago. You're obviously sticking to some of it, but you're also trying to kind of get yourself out and try new things, which is, the idea of doing some abstract paintings along with your other paintings and so on. I think that's fabulous.
Yeah, I have to say I do get restless with that. I get restless is the right word. So I want to try to keep, kind of get away from myself. I don't want to see my own hand in it a lot. So I just kind of move. That's what pushes me in different directions.
Well, and I think that's what keeps us really interested, is that, if you, we both have friends who kind of developed a style and a look, and they kind of have become these manufacturing plants of that style and that look, and they're never pushing their boundaries. I'm not being critical of them. I think everybody should do what works for them, but yeah, exactly. I also, I hear from artists that say, I'm so bored, and it's like, well, get a palette knife out and go crazy and start playing with it and do something different. And then, most people don't want to mess with what they're working on, but the play is a really great tool for growth.
Absolutely. And then, I have to confess something too on that.
We need a confession. We haven't had a confession on this broadcast.
Okay. That's right. Here it is.
What's her name?
Sometimes I think, when I was contacted about doing this with you, you'd asked about a couple of themes I might want to touch on. And this time of year, I have to confess, is always a time where I just have a really difficult time painting altogether, from Thanksgiving until New Year's. It's just, and I've grown to realize that it's part of my rhythm. At first, I think for quite a few years, I would just be like forcing myself to paint. And it might not just be from Thanksgiving to New Year's. It might be, even longer, where it's just really difficult and I have to force myself. And then I thought, well, if I'm forcing myself, then what's the point? So, you have deadlines and so on, but if I'm really forcing myself, I need to just, what is it I have to do here? And I have to back off and fill up the well, so to speak. Maybe the well isn't empty, but I just need to throw some things in there that make it taste better, so that I can, kind of go at it with more vigor and more excitement. If I get to feeling like I'm bored, like you're saying, then that's just, it's not a good place to be.
Well, everybody needs a break. Everybody needs a vacation. Everybody needs to get away from their work once in a while. you know,
Yeah,
you've
exactly.
you've got the benefit of some fabulous museums too. If you get stuck, you can take a walk over to the Oakland Museum and be blown away by some of the people who came before you that were doing incredible work.
Yeah, that's a wonderful museum, and the Crocker Museum in Sacramento,
Oh yeah,
and they have fabulous shows at the. I mean, they had that Andrew Zorn show at the De Young.
yeah,
So yes, indeed, there
and
are some really great
The Hagen
museums.
Museum out, and
Hmm.
you're not too far away. So, well, I those things are all helpful. I'm curious about another thing is the same question, the 20-year question. Have you refined anything about how you approach composition now versus the way you used to? Is there? I hate
I'm
I
more
hate the
open.
idea of formulas, but is there
I'm more
something that
open.
you do more consistently or differently now than then?
I'm more open to editing and combining reference and I mean, I'm trying to think of specifics, but I can't. I think I know, except for saying that, and that is the truth. 20 years ago, I would edit with just by cropping a photograph, for instance, to try to see what or worked out a composition, at least in my mind, and then I kind of just go for that. Now I'm more open to moving things around, to design, to think of the painting as more of a design from the get-go, and realizing that I can make changes right away to my liking, and or combine references together into one piece. So that's been a gradual development over the years.
I like to ask this question because, and the answers are all over the map, but you teach a lot. You find students struggle with certain things. What are the things that you would just like to shake everybody and say, would you just do this? Just do this one thing. It will just completely revolutionize your work.
Well, I think that, it's a good segue, because realizing that you're the designer and not that you don't have to render what's in front of you, that you don't have to copy the photograph if you're using reference. The same way, to really think what is going to work better, and to draw the viewer into the painting, and to create more contrast at the focus. A lot of things that I think that any teacher would encourage. I think the other side of this, though, is to really identify what it is that you are excited about painting. To try to not just follow along what seems like the way to go, the right path, but to really try to. I think having that urge and that desire and that excitement in the beginning, for me, it has to be there. And I don't know that everybody, can appreciate that. They might just do things because they feel like they have to. So that's the other thing is really trying to listen to yourself. And I think the other thing is just giving people permission. It's a tough, for people that are just beginning, it's a steep learning curve, and I remember just being so frustrated. In fact, one of my first workshops that I took myself, trying to do landscape plein air work, was with Michael Lynch. I saw his work in the John Pence Gallery. He showed there for a few years. And the first time I saw his work, I thought, oh my God, that is the bomb. I need to, and he was teaching, and I signed up for a couple classes with him out at the Donner Ranch through the Feshen. I don't know if they still do any classes there, but the Feshen Institute.
Yeah.
Or same family.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Feshen's granddaughter.
Right. And I took a couple classes there with him. First one, I remember standing, I guess, off of the road somewhere in Taos and thinking, oh man, maybe someday I'll like this. Maybe someday. It's just so dang hard. But you just got to stick to it.
Well, it is hard. It's the thing that I am constantly trying to overcome for people is this this sense of talent, right? I mean, you're a talented guy, but most of your talent probably comes from hard work and learning things over the years and so on. And I hope that doesn't sound offensive, but I don't think most of us, and I don't think most of the artists that you and I know, are the kind of people who were, doing Da Vinci level drawings when they were 10 years old. It's something, I mean, there are people who certainly have those occasional skill sets, but I think the thing that we need to communicate with people is that everything is about a learned process, and talent comes into it somewhere along the line. And, there are people who are definitely more talented, but it may have just been the amount of time and effort and applying themselves, putting in the work. But I think as instructors, and I think you're pretty good at this kind of thing, but we need to be saying to people, look, here's what your pathway is going to look like. I mean, it's going to be different for everybody, but it's actually okay to get frustrated, and it's part of the learning process. And when you get the most frustrated is when you're about to learn the biggest lesson. And if we can help people understand that early in the path, I don't know about you, but I know a lot of people who have given up. It's like, I can't do this. And I would imagine you had your moments when you wanted to. I know I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thinking of it as a career, especially when I was in my 30s, I was like, what am I doing? Where the heck am I going with this? Yes, I hear you. And you're right. You do have to, you have to keep at it. It does take a lot of work, but there's huge reward too. And I have to remind myself about that wrestling part, that frequently the most painful place in the middle of a painting is where it's going to turn around and you're going to be good on the other side. And there's always a bit of a wrestling with it. If it was just a, paint by number type of arrangement, and if it was easy, then, it wouldn't be so precious. And we have to inject ourselves into it. Will Wilson was, and I think I've even shared this with you before, Will Wilson was one of the painters at John Pence that was just is an amazing artist, more of in the trompe-l'oeil, more of the not photorealist, because he does a lot of, is very imaginative with his work. But he does large paintings with, probably, 2 hairbrush, effort. I mean, a lot of time, and very traditional painting approach. He shared a great metaphor with a class of mine that I brought to the studio, and he said, painting is like a train ride. Some people get off at the first stop. Some people get off at, New Canaan or Rowayton out in New York. And then some folks have to take that train all the way to New Haven or wherever, end of the line. Let's say Chicago to San Francisco. And it's your personality that's going to tell you where to get off the train. So no matter what you want to paint, or rather what you aspire, what you wish you painted like, you're going to paint like yourself. And then he added at the very end, he's like, and your personality in many ways that's what you want to show. So, don't dodge it.
So when it comes to that, you've got the biggest question I think I get is, how do I find my own style? Do you think that?
Yeah.
Do you think you create it, or do you think it just kind of comes after it's kind of like handwriting. It's like your handwriting just becomes who you are, and it just happens. It's not.
I think there is a little bit of that. But you're the one that feeds. You lead yourself. You follow, or you are attracted to certain things. Like myself, at first with Michael Lynch, I found like that really inspired. I wish I could paint like him, but I can't.
And he might wish he could paint like you.
Even if I did, it wouldn't. So what? Without naming names, there's some styles that are painting that are out there that are very attractive, very loose, like broken down images that are, say, very abstract, and then you see knockoffs. You see a whole bunch of people painting like that.
Yeah.
And you think, oh my God, there is that. I guess derivative is the right word, but if you do try to paint like somebody else intentionally and get good at it, then what does that mean? Even though we do, I catch myself even, getting attracted to influence or feeling drawn and desiring, a certain thing in my painting that I see in somebody else's paintings. It just, I think it's natural. I think it's human.
Well, there's certainly
that.
Lots of examples of people who are going to workshops and studying with somebody and knocking off paintings during the workshop. And that's fine, because that's part of the learning process. But then sticking with that and doing only that, I think there's 2 or 3 artists that we can both think of who, and they're well-meaning artists, but the students themselves are knocking them off, and I'd be on the phone saying, "Hey, knock it off, and knock off knocking me off," because come up with your own thing, because
especially the imagery. It's one thing. It's like we're all trying to teach, help people with the basics initially, and then as people get more experience, then more nuance and more subtle things about whatever medium we're using. But to take the same type of subject matter, for instance, and play with it the same way, that just, that gets my hair standing up.
Yeah, well, people are well-meaning. I don't think anybody's intentionally doing it, but I remember a discussion with an art dealer who I went to a show, and he had told me this particular artist was selling for a lot of money, and that every time he got one in, that, they'd sell right up before they even hung on the wall. And I went to this art show one time, and there was not a red dot on this particular person's painting. And I said, yeah, you told me that these things sell before they even get on the wall. He said, used to, not anymore. And I said, well, why? He said, because this person has taught so many people how to knock himself off. He said, look, come over here. And he showed me 2 other paintings that to an untrained eye were equally as good. They were not as good, but to an untrained eye, which is your typical consumer, they're like, why should I pay $40,000 for this one when I can pay $2,000 for this one, and it's the same subject matter and it feels the same, and same dramatic light and so on. And so, it to some extent, the artist did herself or himself a disservice. Not intentionally, but I think that's the one thing that we all have to communicate too is, look, don't become Randall Sexton, become you.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't need any more of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be yourself.
Well, Randall, we're well into our time now, and I want to make sure that I kind of stick to it. Tell everybody your website.
Sure. I am at, my initials are RCS, R run C S, C cat S sugar, art. Nope, I'm screwing that up. It's my initials, RC Sexton.
RC Sexton.
RCSexton.com, yeah.
SEXTON.com.
SEXTON.
Yeah, and you've got a new mentoring thing that you're doing online, and you're doing some other training and so on. So we've got a video with you. So go to your website, go to Randy's website and check out all the stuff that he's got. He's a great teacher. He taught me a lot. I would love now, 20 years later, to do another workshop with you, just because I would be able to actually understand so much more.
It'd be fun just to paint if you get out here too.
Yeah.
I know that last time I was in Austin, we painted at your studio, just a figure portrait.
Yep.
I've been doing half-size groups. I just started doing that. Even, my studio is like 1,000 square feet. So I have enough space for 4 of us to spread out, plenty of space in between. And I've just started to get that going. This weekend will be the second weekend. So
I miss
Eric,
that. I miss that. And my space isn't very big, and so I can't do my weekly model yet. So I guess it's kind of nice to take a break, actually, but I'm rearing to get back to it. Well, Randy, thank you for being part of the PleinAir Podcast today.
My pleasure. And thank you.
Well, thanks again to Randy Sexton. What a terrific painter. What a great mentor, great teacher, great guy. Make sure to visit his website and just give him a round of applause. He's really a terrific guy. All right. Are you guys ready for some marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art. Proven techniques to turn your passion into profit.
In the Marketing Minute, I answer your art marketing questions. You can email yours to me at Eric. Well, it's Eric at artmarketing.com. So here's a question from Jay Taylor in Arvada, Colorado. Jay says, as we wrap up the year and look forward to the next, I'd like to get some art goals, but I don't know what they should be. What are some reasonable goals we can set as we look forward to next year? Well, Jay, I recommend everybody sequester themselves and set their goals between Christmas and New Year's. Take it seriously. If you actually want to hit goals, if you actually want to accomplish something, it takes planning. It's not something you just go, hey, here's a couple of cool goals, and then you announce them on January 1st, and then you've blown them by February 1st, right? So you want to actually take some time, and all great goals are measurable. All right. Measurable means you need to be able to know if you've accomplished them. And so you want to do your goals in that way. So I can't pick what are good goals for you. I can give you some general things that artists and others might be thinking about. I don't know what your goals are going to be. And quite frankly, if they're not your own goals, you're not going to hit them. You got to believe in them. You got to think about them. You got to constantly monitor your goals. I talk a lot about this in Sunday Coffee, my blog, and I also talk about it in artmarketing.com a lot. Goal setting is very important to me. I set my goals for 2021 back in September. I have big 4 days of meetings with my team for goal setting because that's how important it is. And we monitor those goals every single week. We have a meeting as a team and we go through the goals and we say, okay, here are our goals for the quarter. How are we doing? Here are goals for the year. How are we doing? What are the steps? We make sub goals, steps. You know, they say the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time, right? So you've got to take that elephant and break it up into, monthly goals and then weekly goals and sometimes even daily goals. And you've got to pay attention to them and you've got to take the steps because if you don't take the steps, you won't hit the goals. You can't just say, all right, I'm making 10,000 a year and I want to make 100,000 next year. You know, there's positive thinking and you can think positively about that all day long. But if you don't have a system in place to hit those goals, you're not likely to hit it. So here are some things to think about. Where am I now and where do I want to be? What is the gap? How do I get to where I want to be? What are the steps necessary to get there? And then break them down to weekly and monthly and daily and so on. Are my goals realistic and obtainable? Are my goals measurable? In other words, measurable goals, let's say, an easy measurable goal is I want to make $100,000 a year. And let's say $120,000 a year to make this easy. And that means, okay, now the monthly goal is I got to make $12,000 a month. Well, now the weekly goal in that is, you got, let's say we're based on, 4 weeks in a month. It's probably a little bit different, 4.5 weeks or something. But so now you got to say, all right, if I got to make $12,000, then I got to make $3,000 a week. Well, how do I do that? Well, now I got to say, all right, I got to make how much per day to make $3,000 a week? And if you have a monitoring system that you put in place, what am I doing today to reach that, $500 or $1,000 in sales that I got to get for today or for this week, then you're going to be thinking about those things. And so you want things measurable. Now, it's not just measurable when it's about money. You need to know other goals and how you hit them. So you might have a goal of buying a new car. Well, buying a new car might translate back to money. A trip might translate back to money, but some things don't transfer back to money. For instance, everybody needs different kinds of goals, like you need family goals. So a family goal might be, I'm going to spend, I need to get closer to my kids. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to spend one Saturday a month taking each of my daughters to a daddy-daughter date, or I'm going to spend, I did that. What are the different things that you're going to do? And you need to break them into goals and monthlies and weeklies and so on, because you need to be able to measure those. You also have to ask yourself, what are the sacrifices I'm willing to make? Because goals require sacrifices. Things don't just happen. You have to, if you have to work harder, you might have to paint more, you might have to do more things. And so you've got to ask yourself, am I willing to make those sacrifices? Are they worth it? If I'm going to make $120,000 a year, but I'm going to have to work, 10 hours a day in the studio, and am I willing to do it? Am I going to be, able to make the trips, the teaching trips, or whatever it is you've got to do? So every goal needs to also then be broken down to, what if I hit them? What's next? What if I hit them early? What's next? Will my life be better if my goals are accomplished? And do they really have a purpose? Because your goals need to have a purpose, right? If you just say, hey, I want to have a Gulfstream jet, well, that's nice, but unless you need it, unless you're going to use it, if you say to yourself, well, the reason I want that is because I'm going to do these trips and I need to have personal transportation and blah, 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 then you might want to have purpose. Or, I do a goal, I want to hit a certain number financially every year because I know I'm going to take 10% of that money, and I want to be able to say, look, I'm going to give X amount of dollars to this charity or that charity. So you need to be thinking in terms of that. Anyway, start picturing what your life should be. What is the ideal dream life for you? What do you want it to look like? And then you might not make it in a year. It might take you 20 years. That's okay, but you've just got to take it. So think about your ideal life and say, okay, what can I accomplish this year and next year and so on? Break it into goals. That will help you a lot. And I hope that's been helpful for you. Think in terms of your dreams. And remember, think in terms of different kinds of goals, like financial goals, spiritual goals, family goals, travel goals, painting goals, job goals, etc. You might have a goal like, I want to retire from my job in 5 years and be making the same amount of money. Well, how do you do that? Well, you've got to back it up and say, well, you don't just say, okay, I'm going to leave in 5 years and then start my business. Instead, you say, I'm going to start my business and ramp it up over the course of the next 5 years. So by the time I am out of there, I've got the same income, right? That's the kind of thing I like to think about. Here's a question from Melissa Morris in Overland Park, Kansas. Melissa says, I'm not worried about selling my paintings because I already have a steady income, but I'd like to get more recognition for my work. What are some ways other than sales that I can validate myself as an artist? Well, Melissa, I think that's a very mature statement. I do a thing called Fall Color Week and one in the Adirondacks called Publishers Invitational. And sometimes I'll offer to coach people on their marketing during those events. And I remember we were up in Canada, it was snowing. We had a little more time on our hands because a lot of people didn't want to go out. And so I offered to do some coaching, one-on-one coaching. And two different people basically said to me, I want to sell more paintings. And I would say, well, why? And they started going into it. And I identified in both of their cases that they didn't need the income. They had the income, they had jobs, or they had money, and they had retirement or whatever, and they didn't really need. And they both said, well, I thought I was supposed to do that. Well, there's no supposed to. The supposed to is you got to do what's right for you and for your life. What we identified in both of their cases is that it was really recognition they wanted. It wasn't sales. They wanted to be recognized. So you're already on top of this, Melissa. And I think the way to think about it is, how do I get recognition? Well, you have to ask yourself what kind of recognition you want, what kind of recognition is important, and who do you want it from? So, for instance, if I get recognition from, let's say, my mother, may she rest in peace, when I would, she loved all my paintings, but she loved even the crummy stuff that I did. And so, she's just always going to love me and love what I do. So yeah, it's nice to have recognition from your mom, but who do you want recognition from? Well, you want recognition from people who are maybe your peers or people who matter to you. Like, for instance, I had Daniel Sprick visiting here in Austin recently. And Daniel came over to my studio. And, when somebody walks into your studio and starts looking around at your paintings, you see them differently through their eyes because you wonder what they're thinking. And I showed my self-portrait that I did during COVID, first parts of COVID, to Daniel, and he was very complimentary. And I thought, well, that's, he's just not making up stuff. Now, he saw some of my other work and he was like, not saying anything. And so it was like, okay, well, maybe I didn't do very well for recognition in that area. But so who matters to you? What kind of recognition do you want? I like to use my work for charity auctions and silent auctions and helping out at the school and things like that. And to me, if somebody's bidding on it and ending up owning it, even if I don't get the money, that's recognition, because if people like it and they're signing up for it, they want it. I think that's a great way to get recognition. So think about charities that you can help. I have some rules in my book about if you're giving things to charities, especially if you're marketing yourself. You might want to look at that and say, okay, what else do I want out of that? Do I want publicity? Do I want mail lists? Do I want introductions? I have a set series of things in my book, Make More Money Selling Your Art. And I talk about that a lot. I think charities are a great way to go, whether you're looking to make money or not. A lot of people don't like to give up a painting. I'll give them up all day long. I don't mind, because I use them as tools to help me in other areas. So think about that. Anyway, that's my thoughts on marketing this week.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.
Well, I went a little long on that one, but anyway, I want to remind you guys the PleinAir Convention early bird price is going to be up on Valentine's Day. Makes a great Christmas gift. Just saying, you might know somebody who loves you very much that needs a hint. Another hint would be Watercolor Live. A lot of plein air painters are into watercolor. A lot of them are into gouache, and a lot of them are into having watercolor when they can't take their other paints with them, that sketching and things like that. So Watercolor Live is the world's leading experts in watercolor, the best artists in the world. We have an audience of a worldwide audience. There's going to be thousands of people attending, and it's going to be really cool. You can be part of it. It's virtual. You will be connected with other artists through our breakout sessions. We do paint-alongs and cocktail parties at night, and we have a lot of fun. And once you're part of that group, you get to be part of all the other interaction with the community for the rest of the year, which is kind of nice. So check out watercolorlive.com. Also, reminder that Plein Air Salon, not just all plein air paintings, but all kinds of paintings, a $15,000 grand prize and lots of other prizes and recognition. And you want to enter before the end of December 31st at midnight Pacific time. If you have not seen my blog where I talk about art and life and other things, check it out. It's called Sunday Coffee. Just go to coffeewitheric.com. You can hit the subscribe button. You get it for free. You can also follow me, Eric Rhoads, RHOADS with no E, RHOADS with no E, and follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and other Twitter and TikTok and all kinds of other things. All right. And check out my daily broadcast, 12 noon and 3 p.m. every single day, every weekday on 12 noon, and every single day, 7 days a week at 3 p.m. I'm showing art instruction videos, and I'm interviewing artists and doing demos and things like that, 12 noon every day on Facebook and YouTube. And the way to find that is just go to YouTube and search Streamline Art Video. And if you hit the subscribe button there, you're going to get access to, well over 250 plus days of content times 2. So there's a lot of content in there. Thank you for listening and for sharing this. This is show number 200. If you don't mind sharing it, that would be really a terrific thing for you to do, because we would like to continue to reach more people and get them into plein air painting. This is always fun. We'll do it again sometime, hopefully like next week, God willing. I'll see you then. I'm Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. You can find us online at outdoorpainter.com. Remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it, and I'll see you. Bye-bye.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.